Okay, guys. So far, what we have been doing is we have created a case type, right? In the case type, we are asking the users to enter details like customer detail, address, employment detail, and we are storing them as a part of the case that is being stored into the blob, the case blob, because we are storing the customer information, the employment, the address information, everything into properties are, I mean, we discussed in one of the previous sessions that every data, that every property that we add to a case type, basically in case class or in parent class, that we leverage in the case type, the data that we captured in those properties are stored in the same table as the work object within the blob, right? The work object might share, I mean, multiple cases might share the same work object because they might be just using the same class group. So yes, we got the customer information, we got the address information, we got the employment information, all those information in the case. And if you want to report on that, report in the sense that business wants to see the list of customer that got that has applied for the credit card, right? Or for some other reason, or you might just want to take keep the list of, I mean, you want to, as a business, basically want to have the customer data ready for other purpose, for marketing purpose, for anything. So if you want to report, if you want to see that data, right, outside of the case, the only solution that you have is basically expose the properties, expose the individual properties so that you can store them separately. Now when you are exposing the individual property to store them separately, that means you're creating columns, you're creating the columns in the work class, in the work class table, right, the work pool table. So let's say that the customer has 10 properties, employment has 10 properties, uh, and address has 10 properties, total 30 properties in the work table. Work table already have a lot of work related data, work processing related data. You are now exposing other properties, hence creating another column in the work class. Now the same work table might be used for another case type as well, maybe loan application or maybe some other purpose where the customer data might not be relevant at all. So why do we have the column created directly in the work table? That doesn't make sense, right? We have unnecessary data. We should, in that case, store the data separately out of the case. We should not have the data, the customer data and everything captured inside the case. Instead, we should store it separately somewhere else. Wherever you will store it, you need to create a class. And in that class, of course, you will make that class concrete so that it has a table, and that's where you will store the data. If you look at the customer property, it is actually leveraging, or it is already leveraging a class, data class, b4b data customer. Employment is also doing the same thing, and same thing is being done by the address too. So we already have the classes, we already have these classes, we have the data model defined. It's just that we need to make them concrete and use these classes to store the data instead of storing the data into the case type. That's the concept we are going to learn today. How do we store the data into a separate table? How do we fetch it into the case? How do we basically record the data from the case and then save it into the different table as and when required, right? That's the concept we are going to learn. So first of all, by default, these data models that you create, they are marked as concrete, but they are not created as concrete classes. If you open the class definition, for example, this is by default because we set it up using data type explorer. It is marked as concrete, but it's not concrete. Okay, it's not concrete. Every concrete class needs to have a basically key defined. So you can either change it here, you mark it concrete and define the key. For example, here it will be CID. That's one option, right? Other option to declare a table, declare a data class as concrete and have a table created for that is that you open the data model. So just click on the customer data model and define a source for it. You can do it from the records tab as well, but this is the proper way. See, this data type has no source. It doesn't have a table defined to it. So create a local source. That means create a table in the Pega database, right? Now Pega database means the same database, but there are different schemas. Okay, let it pop up that, and in the meanwhile, I will explain you the schemas that gets created. We already have learned about Pega rules. Pega rules is where the rules get stored. Whatever rules you create and whatever rules Pega has shipped as part of the platform, they all are stored into the tables within the Pega rules schema. Then we have Pega data. All the work object, these classes, class instances that you are creating, they are stored into the Pega data schema, right? So data, work object, and other data as well. Remember, this Pega data schema is called internal database for the data, and it supports blob storage. Blob storage means that it will have that PZPY stream property. Okay, so you can store the data into the blob. You can store the structured data. So, for example, in the customer, you might create a property address which might be a page type. So page type properties can also be stored into the Pega data schema because it supports blob. You do not need to create column for everything. And then there is another schema called customer data. Now this is flat table, flat and normalized table. It is treated as external table, but it's not external. It behaves like external table and meant for storing scalar. I mean, meant for storing flat tables which has proper columns defined. Okay, no embedded, no blob, no blob. All right. So by default, when you create a schema, when you create a table source, it goes into customer schema, customer data schema, because that's what is supposed to be having this flat table, flat data. Okay, so I'm creating it for the customer. So you all the properties that you have added, along with that, Pega also provides some properties that it used to maintain the data, like who updated, who unupdated, who created, when created, and all those things when it was committed. So Pega also has some default properties. Okay, you need to select one of these as key, primary key. So I will select CID as primary key for the customer. And Pega also creates certain data pages. The data pages are meant for retrieving the data from the table. This is another type of rule that we will cover in this session itself, probably or next session. Okay. See, database is by default customer data. You can select other data as well, Pega data, Pega reporting, and all that. But at the moment, we will continue because this is most suitable, right? We want to store this into a flat table. Every property is going to be having column. One more thing about the customer data, that it is auto exposed, which means that, see, like I said, every property will have a column, right? So no concept of blob. So there is no need of exposing the property for reporting or optimizing because they are all automatically stored into separate columns. So no need of exposing the properties. Okay, so this is good for reporting. All right, so I've selected the customer data CID um, as key, and let's submit this. Now internally, Pega will create a table. Pega will modify this that class, basically the customer data class, to make it concrete, and that table will be mapped to that class. Let it happen, and then I'll show you. All right. So this is done. This is done. This is the database table that got created. This is the table mapping rule that got created. This is there is a report definition we will learn about that actually fetches the entire data from the table and stores it into the record tab of data designer, right? And these are the data pages. We will learn about them one by one. Now this is done. Let's refresh it. See, on the records you see the columns. You see all the column. You can add the data here. It will be added to the table as well. Let me show you that. Let me open the table first. While this is opening up, you can open the class definition, and now you will see that it is concrete and it has a key defined. Just save it to get rid of this warning. Yeah. So see, this is concrete. This is a key. If you just click on the test connection, you will know which table it is mapped to. This table in the customer data schema. At the moment, no data. But see, all the columns that you had, all the property that you have, they all are converted into column here, right? Including the Pega provided properties as well. So see, title, first name, last name, CID, gender, PAN, DOB, everything. Now, if you add a record from here, let's say C001 male, just adding a sample record to demo you this. Okay. Now this will automatically be saved in the database table as well. And if you modify anything here, that will automatically be reflected here because this is actually sourcing from the table. Okay. Whatever operation you're doing, that is going directly into the table. So this is how we set up a table, database table, or basically data class table that we leverage for the data storage. Now first I'm going to show you how to fetch the data table, from the table into the case. So if you open this class, so you see the data type here, right? Let me refresh this. When you create a data class or data model as a concrete, you see some detail. If you click on this, this will automatically take you to the record tab of the designer. You see three rules created. These three rules are nothing but the data pages. Okay, three data pages that got created. So in order to fetch the data from the report definition, sorry, from the table, we use a rule called data page. Let me explain you the data page. Data page is a rule type in Pega which we leverage to retrieve the data from different sources. From different sources, it brings up the object, brings up the data from source and keep it. Right, there are several type of database, there are different structure of database. We will learn about that one by one. The first thing is, when you let's say that this is the customer table, right? This is the customer table, it has multiple data, multiple rows. You want to see the record of a customer. How will you do that? You will say select star from this table where some parameter, right? Correct, probably where cid equals to see, I mean, this is just one record, but just for demo purpose, okay? This is how you fetch it. So either you can have a primary key, in that case it will be one to one, or you can query on pan equals to this, dob equals to this, phone equals to this, whatever it is. Data page is a rule which we use to leverage to bring the data from the table, from the integration, from report definition, from using another rule. There are several options, right? We will formally cover the data page as a rule, but right now just an introduction. So once the data page, for example, if we are bringing up the customer record based on the cid by the data page, what essentially the data page is bringing up, it's actually bringing up an object of customer. So its structure could be page. Its structure could be page, or you might query that all the mail customer where you will have list of customers. So it can be page or page list, both structure. Source depends upon where you are getting the data from. That's how you specify that. With this logic, let me show you one data page that Pega sets up when we created the table called customer. Now this customer data page, by the way, you can see all these things in the class as well. So you can open this class in the App Explorer, just like how you open the work class. Let me show you that. So in App Explorer, so it will open it into App Explorer customer data model. Under the data model, data pages comes under data model as well. See D customer. Now D customer is a page, data page. Okay, this is also called declare page because you define it and you run it at the runtime to get the data. So structure could be page or page list. We are using page. What type of object it is going to bring? It is going to bring the B4B data customer object. It's a read only. We will talk about that. Scope, we will talk about that. Thread means that for every case it will be loading a new data. And then data source. You define how to bring the data. There are connector to call integration. There are data transform rule. There are report definition rule, lookup, activity, robotic automation, robotic desktop automation. You can get the data from plenty of sources. Plenty of sources. We use lookup whenever you are getting the data from an internal table or from an external table or basically from a class mapping and you have the primary key. If you are getting the data based on the primary key of a class, you can use lookup. This data page has a parameter called CID. Now this CID is a parameter that we are using to get the data. And the same parameter we are passing into this class param.cid, whatever we retrieved. So since we are using we are getting this data page will get the data based on the customer id, it is using lookup. If you run this from action, you can run it. So it will ask you to provide, it will ask you to provide the customer id and then execute it. So it will go in there in that class, pass this customer id and get you the data. See, this is exactly what we created. But this is pre-created by Pega. I'm going to create the same data page so that you guys know how to create it. So create data. create data page and name it get cust by CID. So you will pass the CID and it will give you the customer record. Same purpose, but I'm creating it so that you know how to create it. So get customer by customer ID. By default, Pega appends d underscore declarative underscore declare underscore basically for in every data page it will be there. This is how we identify this is a data page. Create and open. So because I right click on here and created it, so it automatically kind of populated this class because this is where we have created it. You can change it if you want to bring another classes data. So customer read only thread, and I'm going to say lookup. Get the data using lookup. I need to pass a parameter, add a parameter. You add parameters on the parameter tab. CID is my parameter, or you can say cust ID. Let me rename it. Cust ID is my parameter. This is of type stream. It is required, otherwise the data page will not work, and it is in. It's not going out. It's coming into data page. Okay. Um, then I will configure lookup. If you are using lookup, you need to specify which class data you want to get. So I want to get the customer class data. So this is my class. It will, you will have to, if you try to save it, it will give you error. You will have to pass the parameter primary key of the customer class if you are using lookup. So click on the parameter. So in the Pega, we refer the parameter using a keyword called param. So we got a parameter already supplied. When you run, you will supply this parameter cust ID. You can use this cust ID to pass it into this class. So whatever parameter we got in the cust ID, we will be just passing that as a CID to this class to get the data. Save it. Right. So now I got the data. I will get the data when I will execute this run C001. See, I got the customer data. So this is how we create one type of data page. Basically, this is very simple one to retrieve customer information based on the primary key of the table customer ID. So this is done and dusted. Now let me show you the use case of this. When you are running your case, if customer says I'm an existing customer, if the customer says that okay, I am an existing customer, on the next page you should get the customer detail automatically, correct? And you should actually ask the user to provide their customer ID. So this is what I'm going to change. I'm going to open the case type again. This is here in the new and old. So let me just open this flow. In this flow, this is the flow action, and this is the section when I'm asking user to say if it is yes or no, when new customer no. I'm going to add one more data input field, and I'm going to ask the user to provide the customer ID. Now customer ID is a scattered property, should be in the work class. We create a placeholder customer ID to store user's customer ID when the user inputs that. Okay, so I will create a property cust ID. So I'm going to ask the user to provide me customer ID if it is a new existing customer. So cust ID, this is the property where I will store the cust ID, and it will be visible only when I'm running an expression when the value of new cust is no. Run visibility condition on client means on the browser it will execute it, but that's okay. So if it is no. If the new customer value is no, then display this field to ask the user to enter the customer ID. If it is a new customer, you will not ask. You will generate the customer ID. Okay. Uh, Save it. Let me show you this. I'm going to just refresh this case. So when I say no, the customer ID will be popped up. When I say yes, the customer ID will not be popped up. When I say no, the customer ID will be popped up. Yes, no. On the next tab, if it is no, if it is no, then we should ideally get the customer information pre-populated, maybe in the read-only format, right? So this form is done. Let's close this. The next form is coming from this flow action. Open the flow action and in the section. So in this one, we have embedded the customer information using a property. I will keep that as it is, and I will set that show this only when the customer is new. So I will change the visibility to not when rule to condition, and the condition is going to be when new customer is yes, then only display this. Don't run it on, let it run on the Pega side. So this customer section will be displayed only when the customer is old, sorry, new. So if you go back here and you say yes, you see the customer information. When you come back and say no, that customer section will not be shown. Instead of that, I'm going to embed another section to show when the user is old. So I'm going to embed the same section again, but this time I will be not using a property. This time, you remember when we did that, we used clipboard page. Actually, instead of clipboard page, this time I'm going to use a data page to show the data from the data page into that section. So I'm again going to embed another section, embed a section using a data page, and the data page that I'm going to use is mine, the one that we created. So using this data page, and this is coming from the, okay, so it automatically took the section and it will ask you to provide the parameter. Remember, we use that property to store the parameter, to store the customer ID that the user has entered. Just pass the same. So just ID. This is the property where we have stored the customer ID inputted by the user. So I'm passing the same customer ID to get the customer data using this data page, and I'll show this using the same section, the customer section from this class, right? So it will show you the customer detail. This is going down, let me bring it up, and I will also add a header. I will add a header again. This is the customer information, and this should be visible only when the customer is no, new customer is no. Also, this should ideally be read only. So on the presentation tab, you can mark it as read only always, because this is the data you're fetching. Probably you want to let the user edit it, but edit feature and inserting a new detail we will discuss. That is done a little bit differently using the data page. At the moment, I'll keep it as a read only. See, so I have two customer section. One will be displayed for the old customer, one will be displayed for the new customer, not together. Now if I just come back here and go there, it shows me. But because I did not enter any customer ID, So it is not showing me any data. Now I've inserted a customer ID and it will show me the data of that customer. If I go back and say, no, it's old one, sorry, it's a new one, it will show me the editable section to enter the customer data. How do we, so how do we retrieve the data of the customer from the table is what we learned here, right? But how do we insert and update the data of the customer from there is another topic, right? And that's what we will cover in the next session. So this is basically to retrieving the data from the database table and showing it on the case. Remember, on the clipboard, if you will see, it is not stored in the property. We did not use the customer property to show the data, right? So on the work page, you will see your customer is still blank. The customer page is blank, right? We did not use the customer. All the data pages, all the read-only data pages can be found into another section of the clipboard. Not under user pages, you have data pages, thread level requester, ours is thread level, and you can see your data page somewhere here. Where is that? What? Wow, why it's not showing me? 6001 data page, thread level. Oh, this is strange. Did I mark it at the table? 601 only, right? Okay, let me create a fresh case. This should show up there. In this case, we went to go and back and forth quite a lot. So I will say no. Cust ID is C001. Continue. The data is loaded. Let me show the clipboard. See, get customer by CID. This is the instance. This is the parameter you passed. Customer ID is C0001. This is the class. If you click on this data page, you will see the data on the clipboard. So that's what one basically step in creating, basically in getting the data from the table using a data page. So we learned data page. We learned how to mark a class, data class, basically concrete and store the data. We also learn why it is important to sometimes store the data separately out of the case, right? So out of the case, basically store it separate in a separate table for the reporting. Now you can always go back and report on either from the database or from the Pega. You can basically run query to retrieve all the customer record that you have. So this makes things very easy. All right. So this is where we will conclude this session, right? In the next session, we are going to discuss how to insert, or no, first we will learn about how to update customer data or any data from a table, basically using something called savable data page. So the data page that we created was read only, right? But there is savable data page as well. So we will discuss about that concept. Read only, you can get the data from the source, but you can never modify the data in the data page or the data on the source using this data page. You cannot do that. But savable is something that we leverage to modify the data at the source, in the table, on the data page, everywhere. Okay. All right. So we'll cover that in the next session. Thank you.